Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Spiral Sleeps, A Story Beyond Memory. Chapter 1, The Train to Evermere. The hum of the train was a gentle, rhythmic pulse beneath you, like the breath of something ancient and kind. You sat alone in a first-class carriage, upholstered in emerald velvet. The window to your left framed the countryside like a moving painting. Outside, the rolling hills of southern England stretched into the hazy distance, dotted with sheep-like tufts of wool scattered by a careless hand. The sky above was an eggshell blue, tinged with the golden light of early summer. You had waited for this day, not merely planned it, dreamt of it, rehearsed the scenes in your mind like a memory yet to happen. It wasn't just a holiday. It was something far deeper. A journey inward, disguised as a trip outward. You were headed to Evermere, a small seaside town you'd only read about in dusty travel books and once seen in a postcard tucked into your grandmother's diary. The train's whistle sang through the air. With it came a flutter of anticipation. The cabin was peaceful, but not empty. Across from you sat a woman you had noticed when boarding, not because she was loud, but because she was still. Her name, as you later learned, was Serafina Holloway. She wore a slate gray coat with delicate embroidery of larkspurs curling along the cuffs and collar, and a teal bonnet rested beside her on the seat. She had that rare expression, one of total contentment, the kind seen on those who truly savor moments. She brought a small ceramic cup to her lips, inhaled the steam as though it were perfume, then sipped slowly, eyes closed. Her calmness was contagious. You watched the countryside blur by and felt your shoulders loosen, your breath deepen. The train rolled past sleepy villages, hayfields, and winding brooks, until the city was far behind. A soft chime signaled the steward's arrival, a man in a perfectly creased uniform and shining shoes. "Coffee, sir? Or tea?" You nodded and accepted the coffee, mimicking Serafina's earlier ritual. As the aroma filled your senses, rich, earthy, with a hint of something smoky, you closed your eyes. It was more than coffee. It was the beginning of disconnection from everything heavy and known. Serafina opened her eyes and caught your gaze. "First time to Evermere?" she asked with a voice like a cello, low, resonant, and unexpectedly warm. You nodded. "I think so," you said. "But it already feels familiar." Her smile was subtle. "That's what they all say." She turned her gaze back to the window and said no more. But something in her words lingered, like an echo in a canyon. As the train curved toward the coast, you noticed a slight change. Not in the land, but in time, or perhaps perception. Everything outside grew more vibrant, more golden. The sunlight on the grass shimmered as though it were painted on a canvas still wet. and then it came into view, a sliver of silver beyond the hills. The sea. You leaned forward, heart quickening. The sea was always a thing of longing to you, not just a destination, but a symbol. Freedom. Renewal. Memory. Soon, the train began to slow. Through the wide carriage window, a stone station appeared, etched with the name, Evermere Pierhead. The building looked as though it had stood untouched since the 1800s, its old iron lamps and wrought iron arches now glowing with soft golden light. As you stepped off the train, the air kissed your skin with salt and sunshine. Serafina descended before you, her movements graceful, almost otherworldly. A gentleman greeted her at the platform, tall, dressed in a cream waistcoat and charcoal tailcoat, with a silver pocket watch glinting in the sunlight. He took her hand, and they walked slowly together down the promenade. There was no rush in their step, as though time waited for them. Curiosity urged you forward. You followed, not closely, just enough to keep them in view. The station opened into a town seemingly suspended in time. Horse-drawn carriages rolled past. Children laughed as they played near stalls of striped awnings, selling sugared almonds and roasted chestnuts. It was like walking through a dream sketched in sepia and then brought to life. And yet, no one seemed surprised to see you, not the vendor tipping his hat, nor the boy selling papers with a headline that read, Queen Victoria to visit bathing pavilion. Dated 1849. You stopped. The same year as the postcard. You reached into your coat pocket and pulled it out, the postcard with the faded ink, the exact scene unfolding before your eyes. A breath caught in your throat. Were you dreaming? You looked up and Serafina was there, no longer beside the gentleman, but in front of you. Her teal bonnet gleamed in the sun. She smiled again, gently, knowingly, and tipped her head toward the pier. She was asking you to follow. And somehow, deep within your chest, you knew this wasn't just a journey through space. It was a step into something older. Wiser. Perhaps even magical. And so, with the postcard still in hand, you stepped onto the wooden boards of Evermere Pier, your heart open, your senses alive, and your story just beginning. Chapter 2, Through the Promenade of Time. Your footsteps echoed softly upon the whitewashed planks of Evermere Pier, each step a gentle thud in the quiet harmony of sea breeze and seagull song. The couple Serafina and the gentleman strolled ahead with an elegance that defied modern pace. They were not just dressed in Victorian garb. They moved as if they belonged there, as if the world around them molded itself to their rhythm. You kept a respectful distance, drawn to them by an invisible thread. To your right, the promenade was alive, not with noise, but with a timeless serenity. Wooden chalets on wheels stood proudly by the shoreline, striped in faded colors like old carnival tents. Their wheels were sunk in the golden sand, and their doors faced the sea, half open, revealing elegant parasols and folded blankets inside. You passed a young boy holding a newsprint too large for his arms. The headline caught your eye again, Royal Visit Confirmed, Queen to Open Evermere Grand Hall. The year, 1849. Exactly like the postcard. You blinked, heart thudding gently against your ribs. The air seemed warmer here, as if nostalgia itself had weight. Children giggled as they ran along the sand, dressed in miniature sailor suits and ruffled dresses. One girl waved to you, her curls bouncing, and then returned to her task of building a sandcastle, one complete with a moat and tiny pennants made of toothpicks. You passed stalls lined with jars of candied violets, lavender fudge, and biscuits with names you'd never heard but suddenly wanted to taste. A woman in a sky blue bonnet caught your eye and nodded as though she'd known you all her life. Every detail was perfect, too perfect. Was this a dream? If it was, you didn't want to wake. Ahead, the promenade widened. The crowd thickened around a booth, a miniature theater painted in red and white with gold flourishes. A man in a striped vest and bowler hat blew a set of panpipes, and the velvet curtain drew open. Hand puppets burst into motion. Mr. Punch and Judy, in all their ridiculous, slapstick glory. The crowd roared with laughter. Not just children. Adults. Elderly women with feathered hats. Stoic gentlemen who doubled over with mirth. Their joy was infectious. Even Serafina laughed. You saw her gloved hand cover her smile, and the sparkle in her eyes lit something in you. The kind of warmth reserved for old friends or favorite books read beneath the covers on rainy days. Coins clinked into a velvet-lined hat after the show ended. You watched as the couple moved on, hand in hand, like dancers in a waltz only they could hear. You followed. Further along, the pier curved toward a small inlet where boats gently rocked against moorings. A group of elderly ladies in extravagant gowns, all lace and lilac and lilting giggles, were being helped aboard a rowboat by a mariner in a cap too large for his head. They lifted their skirts with grace, revealing polished boots, and lowered themselves into the vessel with dignified delight. One of them caught your eye and winked. A child's voice chimed in from the shore, "I'm riding a horse." Though it was only a donkey, led by a boy who looked more like a character from a painting than real life. Still, the child's glee was pure, and you couldn't help but smile. A gust of sea air swept across your face. Salt, sunshine, the scent of toffee apples, and distant organ music. You paused by the railings of the promenade and looked out. There she was. Serafina. Not walking this time, but standing alone, gazing out to sea. Her parasol rested on her shoulder, her bonnet catching the light like a jewel. You approached, heart thudding not from nerves, but from wonder. She didn't turn at first, as if waiting for the wind to whisper something. Then slowly, she looked back at you. Her eyes met yours with calm assurance, as though this moment had already happened, as though it had been written. She raised her hand and pointed, not at the sea, but to your pocket. The postcard. You pulled it out. And now, seeing the scene before you, the laughter, the striped parasols, the white hot pier stretching into the horizon, it was identical. Not similar. Identical. Everything the artist had captured was here. Alive. moving. Real. Serafina nodded once, slowly, as if satisfied. She did not speak. She did not need to. And then she turned, the gentleman now rejoining her side, and together they stepped forward, not hurried, not hesitant but sure. You followed. There was a magic in the air now, undeniable, gentle but intoxicating. The promenade narrowed again, leading towards something grand in the distance. You could make out a tall structure, columns, a glass dome reflecting the sun, the faint sound of music rising from within. The Grand Hall of Evermere. A place you'd only read about in legend. But now, you were going to walk through its doors. Chapter 3, The Grand Hall of Echoes. The closer you walked, the more the sound transformed. What had begun as distant organ music now grew richer, fuller, like a symphony woven into the wind. It wasn't just music, it was memory, played on invisible instruments by hands that had long since faded from time. The Grand Hall of Evermere loomed ahead, its stained glass dome glinting like a crown upon the town's sunlit brow. The hall's entrance was flanked by twin columns of white marble veined with hues of soft lavender and rose. Carvings wrapped their way up the stone: dolphins, sea foam, ships caught in waves like a tale sculpted in silence. Above the doorway, a plaque bore the inscription, "Time remembers those who remember wonder." You stepped across the threshold. Inside, the hall stretched farther and higher than seemed architecturally possible. The ceiling was a kaleidoscope of glass, each panel depicting moments from seaside holidays long past, families in parasols, children with sand pails, lovers beneath stars. Yet, the faces were familiar. You squinted at one panel. Was that the girl with the curls who waved at you earlier? Another showed Serafina, unmistakably poised with parasol in hand. The room pulsed with warm light and life. Dozens of people moved throughout the space. Ladies in lace gloves chatted near ornate fountains. Gentlemen in tailcoats inspected miniature sailboats that floated in mid-air displays. At the far end, a grand staircase curled upward toward a mezzanine filled with hanging lanterns, each one a different color and intensity, swaying though no wind touched them. Serafina and the gentleman stood beneath the central chandelier, waiting. You approached, stepped slow, like walking into a dream you were both part of and not. "Welcome," Serafina said, her voice resonating in the hall as if the walls had waited centuries to hear it again. "You've come farther than most." You hesitated. "Farther?" The gentleman, whose name you now learned was Lord Callanthorne, stepped forward. Few who hold the postcard ever find the pier. Fewer still hear the music. He offered you a small, leather-bound book unmarked, the size of your hand. You opened it. Inside, blank pages. Until just one bore writing. Your name. And below it, a single date, July 14, 1849. "But, that's not possible," you murmured. Serafina's eyes sparkled. "And yet here you are." A hush fell over the hall. Not silence, more like anticipation. Even the flickering lanterns above paused their dance. "You're not the first," Callan said gently. "Every generation, one soul is called." "Called to what?" you asked, though your heart already stirred with the answer. Serafina gestured toward a narrow archway behind the staircase. "To remember. To preserve what was lost." You followed her gaze. The archway glowed faintly, like moonlight caught in mist. "But why me?" Callan smiled. "Because you believed the postcard." You laughed once softly, nervously. "That's all it takes." "That," Serafina replied, "and a heart still open to magic." A bell chimed high above, near the stained glass dome, and in its resonance, the hall shifted. Just slightly. You felt it in your chest, like stepping between one heartbeat and the next. The people in the hall paused. Then, without a word, they began moving toward side doors. Couples disappeared behind velvet curtains. Children danced toward stairwells that shimmered like water. A dog barked, joyful, and trotted through a wall like it was made of mist. Only you, Serafina, and Callan remained. The hall dimmed to twilight. The chandelier's light softened to hues of blue and amethyst. "Time is thinning," Serafina said. "We must hurry." You followed her and Callan through the archway. Beyond it lay a corridor unlike anything you had seen. Each wall was lined with clocks, all different, none ticking in sync. Grandfather clocks taller than men, tiny pocket watches suspended in glass, sundials glowing with their own inner fire. Time, in all its forms, surrounded you. Some clocks ran forward, others backward. Some remained still. As you walked, the corridor began to tell stories. Murals on the walls shimmered to life, images painted with moving stardust. A young boy finding a seashell that whispered a forgotten language. A woman folding a letter she'd never sent. A child waving goodbye at a train station that never reopened. "What are these?" you asked. "Echoes," Callan replied. "Moments lost, waiting to be remembered." At the corridor's end, you reached a chamber bathed in soft violet light. In its center stood a tall mirror, surrounded by salt-crusted lanterns and a shallow pool of water. "This is the reflection room," Serafina whispered. "If you step inside, you will see." You hesitated, then stepped onto the stone platform. The mirror rippled. And then you saw yourself. Not as you were. As you could be. Your reflection shifted, showing you laughing in Edwardian gardens, running along seaside cliffs, dancing in an autumn masquerade beneath stars unfamiliar to your century. Scenes unfolded that didn't belong to this world, or perhaps did, once. And then, it stopped. The mirror turned clear. You were back. Serafina approached. She pressed something into your hand, a pocket watch. Its face was blank. But as you held it, your name engraved itself upon it, shimmering like frost in sunlight. Callan's voice came softly. You are now the keeper of Evermere. What does that mean? You asked. Serafina smiled sadly. It means your journey is only just beginning. And with that, the corridor faded. You awoke sitting on the same velvet train seat. The countryside rushing past. But in your palm, the pocket watch remained. Ticking. Softly. Endlessly. Chapter 4, The Return to the Timeless Shore. The train cabin was quiet again. Too quiet. The velvet seat beneath you felt just as it had before, the same emerald green, the same soft sway of the wheels beneath you, but something had shifted. The countryside out the window rushed by as it always had, and yet, the light had changed. Not the time of day, but something subtler. The sunlight seemed to bend differently, filtering through the glass with a tint of silver, as though memory itself had thickened in the air. You looked down at your hand. The pocket watch was still there. Still ticking. And your name engraved in filigree script that shimmered faintly had not faded. A gust of salt air wafted in from nowhere. The scent of sea and old paper. You sat up straighter. The door at the end of the carriage creaked open on its own. Beyond it lay not another compartment, but a hallway you hadn't noticed before, one lined with brass fixtures and lanterns dimly glowing with lavender light. Your pulse quickened. It was happening again. You stood, stepping cautiously through the doorway. The floor beneath you no longer hummed like a train. It echoed like polished stone. The hallway twisted gently, like a spiral, and at its end, the light broke open into golden mist. You stepped through. And there it was. Evermere. Not as you had seen it before. Not on a sunny summer day filled with laughter and puppeteers. This time, it was dusk. Twilight bathed the town in hues of rose and violet. Shadows stretched long across the promenade. Lamps flickered to life one by one, casting halos across the cobblestone streets. The pier no longer bustled with visitors, it waited, patient, like a stage before the curtain rose. You walked in silence, boots tapping gently on old stone, until you reached the wooden boardwalk of the shore. And that's when you saw him. A boy. No older than 10. Sitting alone on the edge of the pier, feet dangling above the water, arms wrapped around an old leather journal. He turned to look at you, eyes dark, but filled with light. Are you the new keeper? He asked softly. You hesitated. I suppose I am. He stood and approached. Then you'll need this. He handed you the journal. Its leather cover was cracked and salt-worn. Inside were sketches, delicate ink drawings of Evermere through the ages. But one page had only words. The forgotten must be found. Beneath it, a list of names, dates, events that never made it into history books, and a blank space at the bottom. Enough for more. They fade when no one remembers, the boy whispered. You must remember them. But who are you? You asked. He gave a crooked smile. A memory. One someone forgot to finish. And with that like mist blown by wind he was gone. You stood alone, journal in hand, beneath the lanterns of a town suspended in twilight. Footsteps echoed behind you. Serafina. Her silhouette emerged from the glow, parasol now closed and slung over one shoulder. Her face was more serious this time, not sad, but solemn. The watch will take you back, she said. But the hall, it will call again. You nodded. What am I supposed to do? Seek the stories that time misplaced, she answered. And write them. But, where do I start? She turned and pointed to a small building down the shore. A glass conservatory, mostly overgrown, sat surrounded by ancient hydrangeas. The archives of echoes, she said. Some stories are waiting inside. As you made your way to the building, the pocket watch pulsed in your palm, not ticking, now, but beating. Like a second heart. Inside the conservatory, time was trapped in ivy. Bookshelves spiraled toward the ceiling like trees. Scrolls slept in glass jars. Maps fluttered of their own accord. A globe turned slowly, spinning to years that hadn't happened yet. You lit a lantern and began to read. And as you turned the first page of the first forgotten tale about a girl who stitched clouds into the hems of her dresses, the ink shimmered and flowed, rewriting itself before your eyes. The journal in your hand glowed faintly. Recording it. Restoring it. You now understood. Evermere was not just a place. It was a sanctuary for what time tried to erase. And you were its scribe. Its keeper. Its final witness. Outside, the tide began to rise again. A breeze stirred. And from somewhere far away, or maybe from the future, you heard the music return. Chapter 5, The Archivist's Test. The lantern in your hand flickered, its light bending the shadows in ways that suggested they were watching. You stood in the center of the archives of echoes, surrounded by a forest of shelves that towered high above like ancient trees carved from stories instead of wood. Dust motes floated through the air like snowflakes of memory, drifting in and out of the golden beam. The journal trembled in your grasp. On its most recent page, ink was still forming alive, fluid, painting a message in script you somehow recognized but had never studied. Every keeper must walk the forgotten path. The archivist awaits. A low hum rolled through the conservatory. Somewhere in the distance, a great door creaked open, not with hinges, but like stone shifting in a tomb. You turned toward the sound. It came from the lower vaults, a restricted section you hadn't noticed before. At the end of the aisle, flanked by brass gargoyles with watchful eyes, was a spiral staircase descending into the earth. Its steps were carved of obsidian, and the railing was wrapped in a metal vine that pulsed faintly with light. The air grew colder as you descended, each step echoing like a heartbeat in a cathedral. The warmth of ephemeris twilight was gone. In its place, a solemn hush settled over you, the kind of silence reserved for secrets too sacred to be spoken. At the bottom of the staircase stood a door. Simple. Wooden. Ancient. You raised the lantern. Carved into the door was a symbol, an eye suspended in a teardrop, surrounded by thorns. The door opened before you touched it. Inside was a room shaped like a hexagon, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not your face, but other versions of yourself, younger, older, unsure, laughing, crying. Each one moved slightly out of sync, as if your past and future were watching you with curiosity. And at the center of the chamber sat a figure. Draped in layers of twilight gray robes, the archivist had no face, only a porcelain mask, cracked down the center. Their hands, thin and elegant, rested atop a pedestal where a book lay open. Unlike your journal, this tome was massive, bound in bark and stitched with silver thread. "Keeper," the archivist intoned. Their voice was not sound, but feeling a vibration in your bones. "I came to learn," you said, your voice small in the cavernous room. "You came to remember," they corrected. "But to remember, you must first forget." They raised one finger and pointed to the pedestal. The book's pages turned of their own accord, landing on one marked with a golden seal. A single name was written at the top, Eloan Tidewell. Below it, erased. A chill ran down your spine. "Who is she?" you asked. "She was," the archivist replied. You stepped closer. The golden seal cracked open like dry wax, and a light erupted from the page, enveloping the chamber in white. When your vision cleared, the room was gone. You stood in a coastal village. The sea howled in the distance, and the sky was bruised with storm clouds. Cottages lined the stone streets, their shutters clapping in the wind. Children ran from door to door, collecting driftwood. Fishermen shouted over waves that crept too close to their boats. But something was wrong. No one could see you. You moved through the streets like a ghost. A name echoed through the wind, Eloan. You followed it. Down a cliffside path, you found her. A girl, perhaps 16, with sea glass eyes and hair the color of dusk. She stood at the edge of the rocks, arms outstretched, whispering to the waves. "They don't remember," she said. "They don't remember who I am." You tried to speak. She didn't hear you. You reached out, your fingers passed through her like smoke. Then, a second presence appeared. A shadow. It crept along the rocks like spilled ink, wrapping itself around her words, devouring the memory of her. You could feel it. This thing was not time, nor age. It was forgetfulness, and it was hungry. Eloan turned toward it, tears streaking her cheeks. I existed, she whispered. I loved. I sang to the sea. The shadow rose like a wave. You screamed, but no sound came. And then, the pocket watch in your coat burst with light. In an instant, the world shattered like glass. You were back in the mirror chamber. The archivist stood unmoved. You saw it, they said. I couldn't help her, you whispered. No, the archivist replied. But you can now. They reached toward your journal. Its cover opened, and a blank page flipped forward. A pen ancient and feathered appeared in your hand. You hesitated. What if I don't write it right? The archivist said, truth only fades when no one dares to speak it. Write what you saw. Give her back to time. So you did. You wrote her name, her voice, her storm, her sea glass eyes, the songs she hummed on the cliffs, the words she whispered before being erased. With every letter, the lantern burned brighter. The journal thrummed beneath your hand like a living thing. And when the final word was written, the mirrors in the chamber shifted. In every one, Eloan appeared, smiling. Remembered. You turned to the archivist. They bowed. You have passed the first test. The path is now open. You blinked. The chamber faded. You were back in the conservatory, the lantern warm and steady, the journal heavier now richer. And outside, dawn broke over Evermere once more. Chapter 6, The Carousel of Lost Names. Dawn stretched across Evermere like a breath held too long, quiet, golden, expectant. You stood on the conservatory's steps, the journal in your hand still warm from the memory of Eloan. The page where you had written her story glowed faintly, as if her soul now rested within the ink. But the weight of what you had done and what still lay ahead pressed against your chest. The town was awakening. Not with the bustle of a modern morning, but with the soft rustle of pages turning, shutters creaking open, and wind chimes playing forgotten lullabies. Seagulls traced arcs in the sky, calling out like ancient messengers between worlds. You opened a pocket watch. The hands had moved. 12 minutes past 6. A note now appeared beneath them, etched in curling script that hadn't been there before. Find the carousel. Spin it once. Speak no name. You frowned. There was no carousel in Evermere. At least, not one you remembered. But something inside you stirred a tug of certainty beneath your ribs. You set off along the promenade, the sound of your footsteps drowned by the crashing of waves nearby. The town had changed subtly. Shops you had not noticed before were now open, with names like the Gentle Clockmaker, Salt and Memory, and Threads of Then. People moved slowly, gracefully, their faces half familiar, like dreams that had just begun to fade. One woman nodded to you and whispered, "Don't let them forget you too." You turned, but she had already entered the mist beyond the stalls. Eventually, you found yourself at the edge of the coastal woods. Here, the sea breeze grew quieter, replaced by a rustling hush like paper leaves turning themselves. A cobblestone path curled through the trees, overgrown and shrouded in ivy, until it opened into a small clearing. And there it stood. The Carousel of Lost Names. At first glance, it looked broken, crooked poles, paint peeling, creatures worn from time. But as you stepped closer, the air changed. The sky overhead dimmed to twilight, though the sun still hung high beyond the trees. The carousel creaked once. Its figures were not horses. There was a lion with closed eyes, a stag made of mirrors, a moth with tattered wings, and a wolf whose mouth was stitched shut with silver thread. Each creature was saddled, waiting, watching. A brass plaque at the base read, "Only the forgotten may ride. Only the keeper may remember. Spin once. Speak no name. Or be claimed." You placed a hand on the lion. It felt like stone warmed by sun, yet your fingers tingled as if the creature breathed beneath its surface. With trembling hands, you reached for the crank. One slow, deliberate turn. The carousel moaned into motion. It spun counterclockwise. The air thickened. Time shivered. And then, the carousel vanished. You stood now in a vast, mist-covered plain. The sky overhead was ink black, pierced by constellations you did not recognize. The only sound was wind, but even it seemed unsure of itself. Before you, 4 figures emerged from the mist. Each one rode one of the carousel beasts. Each wore a silver chain. And each bore your face. You gasped. But they were not you. Not anymore. One spoke, the lion rider, tall and noble, his voice deep and tired. "I was the keeper during the silver winter. I restored the poems of Myra Thorne. I failed to find the lost nursery under the sea. I forgot my name to preserve hers." Another, the stag rider, a woman, her face lined with stars. "I was the keeper when the sandstorms buried the bells of sorrow. I recorded 26 forgotten lullabies. I traded my own childhood for their melodies." The third, the moth, a child, perhaps 11, eyes pale as milk. "I remembered too much. I remembered things that had never happened. And now I'm here. Always spinning." And the last, the wolf, never spoke. Its stitched mouth twitched, as if struggling to warn you. You stepped back. "What is this place?" you whispered. The lion rider looked down. "This is the carousel's toll. If I speak a name, you stay," said the child. You clenched the journal tighter. "I didn't ask for this," you said. "But you listened," the stag woman said. "And you believed. That is enough." They raised their hands, each holding a page. The pages fluttered through the air and wrapped around your journal, vanishing into it. Suddenly the carousel returned its figures motionless again. You stood alone. But something had changed. You looked at the journal. 4 new pages had appeared. Each with a name. Each with a story not yet read. Each one, yours to finish. The wind shifted. A soft voice echoed in your mind. You carry more than memory now. You carry legacy. And then, for the first time, the pocket watch struck a chime. Not ticking, not counting, but announcing. Another door was opening. And the next story was calling. Chapter 7, The Bells Beneath the Sea. The chime from the pocket watch echoed long after it faded, resonating somewhere deeper than sound, somewhere within your ribs, your spine, your bones. The journal in your hand pulsed once, and a new page turned itself, revealing a name written in salt-streaked ink. The Bells of Narrated. Below it, a single instruction. Seek them where the sea forgot. You sat beneath a weeping willow near Evermera's oldest lighthouse, staring at the page, the grass tickling your palms, the ocean breathing steadily in the distance. A gull cried overhead, but it was not the same kind of call as before. It sounded older, wiser, as if it remembered the bells too. You stood, and the moment your feet touched the path, the world suddenly shifted like a tide pulling back to reveal something once buried. You followed the sound. Past the seaside shops and the carousel now silent again, down a winding trail carved into cliffside stone. You passed tide pools where starfish blinked slowly and barnacles whispered forgotten rhymes. The sky had begun to gray, not with storm, but with memory. The path ended at a grotto. A natural arch carved by centuries of waves, dark, wet, and humming faintly. From deep within it, the distant tolling of a bell rang once. Then silence. You stepped inside. The walls of the tunnel glistened with lichen and crystals. Your lantern cast pale gold light on mural scenes of a drowned cathedral, towers beneath waves, fish swimming through stained glass. You ran your fingers along the etched stone. They rang once every century, a voice whispered behind you. You turned and found Serafina there again. But this time, she was different. Her parasol was gone. Her clothes soaked to the hem. Hair damp against her neck. She looked like she had just emerged from the sea itself. Where did they go? You asked. They didn't go anywhere, she said softly. It was we who turned away from them. You stepped closer. They still ring. She nodded once. But only for those who are willing to listen beneath the surface. A ripple passed through the tunnel. The floor trembled slightly and then opened. A circular hatch of brass and coral appeared, as though summoned by your intent. In its center, a keyhole shaped like a bell. You looked to Serafina. She held out a small bell, no bigger than a locket, made of moonstone and tied with a string of kelp. Use this, she said. But only ring it once. More than once, and you'll lose your way. You took it? The hatch responded immediately, unlocking with a sigh. You descended into water. But, you did not drown. As your boots touched the stairwell below, air returned. Your lungs filled as though the sea itself allowed it. Around you, the world blurred into sapphire and aquamarine. The sunken cathedral of Narrated stood before you. Its towers reached toward the surface, choked with coral and moss. Fish darted between archways. Seaweed curled through broken pews. The stained glass shone dimly in the filtered light, still radiant despite centuries beneath the waves. You stepped through the threshold. Immediately, the toll of bells echoed again, not loud, but haunting. They did not come from the cathedral. They came from below. You followed the sound, deeper into the nave, past statues of forgotten saints, past inscriptions in languages that shifted each time you blinked. At the altar, a trapdoor awaited. Your heart thudded. You lifted the bell. Rang it once. The floor melted away. You were falling not through water, but through time. Visions flashed around you. A bride placing a bell at the shore, waiting for a ship that never returned. A child lighting candles in a flooded crypt. A monk writing the name Narrated on parchment that dissolved in tears. And then, silence. You landed on black sand. Before you stood the bell garden. Hundreds of bells, all different sizes, all silent, resting in a grove of stone and sea foam. Some were cracked. Others pristine. All waiting. In the center stood a single bell. Taller than a house. Its name was etched across its body in gold. Remembrance. You stepped toward it. The journal pulsed again, flipping open to a blank page. As you placed your hand on the great bell, your own reflection shivered, not showing you as you were, but as others remembered you. Serafina, smiling in the lantern light. The boy at the pier, handing you the journal. The child version of yourself, building sandcastles no one else could see. And then the bell tolled. You didn't ring it. It rang for you. The sound rippled through the water, through time, through silence itself. And all the other bells answered. 100 songs of memory. 1,000 names once lost. A million echoes breaking the sea. Your journal absorbed the sound. The ink danced. The name Narrated was etched in gold. The page shimmered and sealed. And the water receded. You stood once more on the cliff, above the grotto, the locket bell in your hand now silent forever. Seraphina stood beside you, dry again, smiling faintly. "You've done well," she said. "But the sea is only one voice." "What's next?" you asked. She looked toward the hills and the shadows dancing at their edges. The forgotten have begun to wake. Chapter 8, The House with the Locked Door. The winds shifted over Evermere. No longer playful like the breezes that danced through the market stalls. This was a quieter current, heavier as if it carried messages unspoken, or names too fragile to be said aloud. You stood at the edge of the cliff-top path, the locket bell now hanging around your neck, motionless, weightless, and yet you knew, it had changed you. The journal in your hand had grown thicker. Not by pages but by gravity. Each story you restored etched something not just into time, but into yourself. And now, a new page had turned. This time, there was no name. Only an address. No. 11, Vale Hollow Road. Evermere's forgotten district. Your heart skipped. Everyone you had met so far spoke of memories, others, the towns, even the worlds. But this felt different. This was your memory. And something within it had chosen to remain locked. You followed the cobbled paths leading beyond the carousel and into a part of Evermere not marked on any map. The lanterns here flickered inconsistently. The air smelled not of salt and stone but of smoke, dried lavender, and cold wood. Vale Hollow was its name and never had a place been more fitting. Houses stood close together, their shutters nailed shut, ivy curling up chimneys like whispers trying to escape. No people stirred here. No voices greeted you. It was a district trapped between heartbeats suspended, silent, watching. You found number 11. A narrow townhouse, black bricked, with a door made of dark oak bound in rusted iron. The windows were clouded. Curtains moved slightly inside, though there was no wind. As you approached, your pocket watch stopped ticking. It froze. The hands pointed to midnight. Though the sun still hovered behind the clouds. You reached out. The door refused your hand. And then your journal opened by itself. A key rose from its center. But unlike the other keys, this one was not brass or silver. It was glass. Fragile. Thin. You inserted it into the iron lock. The door creaked open, not like wood but like bones. Inside, the air was colder. Dust blanketed everything, or was it ash? You stepped inside. The door closed behind you. You were alone. Except, you weren't. Your breath echoed louder than it should have. The floor beneath you groaned, each step stirring something not in the house, but in you. Photographs lined the walls, but their faces were scratched out. Portraits with eyes painted over. A family dining, but no mouths. A child holding a lantern, but the lantern was blackened. You turned a corner. Found a mirror. It did not reflect you. It showed a room, this room, but not now. Then, a small boy stood in the center. Tears on his cheeks. A key in his hand. A locked door behind him. And a voice shouting from the other side. You blinked. The mirror cracked. And in that moment, the journal began to hum. You looked down. The page now read. Here lies the door you locked. To open it, you must remember what you refused. The walls shuddered. Floorboards curled slightly, exposing the edges of another door beneath the carpet, beneath the floor. You knelt and peeled the rug back. A trapdoor, carved with your initials. You reached for the handle, and hesitated. But something inside the keeper part of you said this had to be done. You opened it. Darkness spilled out. Not black. Not void. But remembered fear. You descended into a room filled with artifacts. Childhood toys. A cracked snow globe. A locket with 2 silhouettes. An empty journal. And in the center a figure. Kneeling. Back turned. Hair like yours. Clothes like yours. Hands shaking. You stepped closer. The figure whispered, "Why did you lock me down here?" You froze. It turned. And it was you. Not an echo. Not a shadow. But a younger version, the part of you who once decided forgetting was safer than remembering. The younger self stood, eyes full of betrayal. "I begged you," they said. "I begged you not to look." "I had to," you replied. "I have to know now." "Then remember," they said. And with that the room vanished. And your mind was thrown back. Back to the day you first received the Evermere postcard. To the dream that haunted you for years. To the night you awoke with your name missing from your own voice. Back to a hallway where a voice called to you through a locked door and you didn't open it. You couldn't. Not then. But now. You did. And what came through was not fear, but forgiveness. The child self smiled. "I knew you'd come back." The house reassembled around you. The portraits regained their faces. The rooms breathed again. The watch ticked once more. and the page in your journal now held a name. Your own. Written in your handwriting for the first time. The house whispered thanks as you stepped outside. The mist lifted. The forgotten district stirred. And Serafina waited at the edge. Well done, she said, her voice softer than ever. You remembered who you were. You looked up at the sky. Dusk again. And in the clouds a shape forming. A gate. Lit from within. A passageway to something, beyond Evermere. Something next. And for the first time, you felt ready. Chapter 9, The Spiral Gate. The mist parted like a curtain drawn back by invisible hands. Above you, suspended in the glowing dusk sky, hovered the spiral gate, a luminous ring of braided starlight and memory. It spun slowly, silently, as though the universe itself had forgotten why it turned, but continued out of habit. Clouds formed sigils around it. Time bent in curves. Light flickered in rhythm with something ancient and knowing. Serafina stood beside you, her parasol now a cane of white ash, crowned with a pearl. This is where I leave you, she said gently. Beyond this point, no keeper may follow another. You must walk the spiral alone. You turned to her. What's waiting on the other side? She smiled, not her usual composed smile, but one touched by sorrow. The memoriam. The place where all stories converge. Where lost memories wait not just to be remembered, but to remember you. The pocket watch in your palm clicked once, not a tick, but a confirmation. You stepped forward. The journal pulsed. The spiral gate opened. You were lifted not by wind or wings, but by the weight of your own remembered truths. The world turned inside out. When you opened your eyes, you stood in a circular hall with no walls. Only bookshelves. Endless spirals of shelves, winding upward and downward into darkness and light alike. And walking between them were figures, hundreds, maybe thousands, robed in fabric woven from words. Some were transparent. Some glowed. Some wept as they traced their fingers over spines of books that had forgotten their own names. Welcome to the memoriam. Your arrival did not go unnoticed. A voice spoke, deep and resonant. Keeper. You have stepped into the cycle. You turned. A figure approached, tall, cloaked in ink-black robes embroidered with constellations. Their face was hidden behind a mask shaped like a clock missing its hands. I am the spiral curator, the voice continued. You now bear 4 remembered names. 1 your own. The others borrowed from time. You nodded, unsure how you understood, but certain you did. You must now find the story that was never written. The one that hides not because it is forgotten, but because it never dared exist. You opened your journal. A new page bled itself into being. It read, File No. 000, the name before the first word. The spiral curator gestured to a stairwell spiraling down. You will need to pass the 3 chambers. Chambers of what? You asked. He paused. Possibility. Regret. Choice. Your breath hitched. And so, you descended. The first chamber, possibility. The chamber bloomed open like a flower of glass. Inside, infinite reflections of you moved in slow circles, versions of yourself that had chosen differently. One walked away from Evermere. One stayed forever in the carousel. One never opened the trapdoor in Vale Hollow. Each version approached. Spoke one word. Why? You couldn't answer. Because you didn't yet know. A single version stepped forward, you, older, wiser, scarred. I chose silence, he said. And I became memory's ghost. You shook your head. I won't. Then write the choice, he said. You opened a journal. Wrote. I chose to walk the spiral, even without knowing where it ends. The others bowed. And vanished. The second chamber, regret. This room held no doors. Only mirrors, each cracked differently. Inside each, a face. The boy on the pier. Eloan at the cliff. The silent wolf keeper. Seraphina, but younger, her eyes pleading. They each said the same phrase. If only. The chamber pulled at your chest like gravity made of guilt. But the journal in your hand warmed. A page turned. You wrote, slowly, deliberately. I do not erase regret. I build upon it. The mirrors healed. The chamber opened. The third chamber, choice. Empty. Except for a pedestal. On it, a book. Its cover blank. But beside it 2 quills. One gold. One black. The curator's voice returned. Write with gold, and your journey ends in peace. Write with black, and the spiral continues. You stared. Your fingers trembled. Gold meant release. Closure. Safety. Black meant uncertainty. Another turn. Another forgetting. Another remembering. But then, from the folds of your coat, the pocket watch rang once more. Midnight again. And beneath it a new line. The forgotten still call. You picked up the black quill. And began to write. As you wrote, the book shimmered page by page, forming itself around your words. Images formed. Voices returned. You saw a woman beneath a lake, whispering to the reeds. A boy who painted doors that led to nowhere, and then made one open. A lighthouse keeper who lit a flame in a storm that had no end. The story unfolded, one that had never been told. And when the final word was placed, the memoriam sang. Thousands of voices' stories awakened, echoed through the spirals. You stepped back. The curator bowed. You have written the name before the first word. And now? You asked. Now, the spiral turns again. But not to take. This time, to return. The gate behind you reopened. And through it Evermere. Brighter. Alive. And waiting. You stepped through. And this time, the town remembered you. Not as a visitor, but as a part of it. As the keeper who chose the spiral again and again. Chapter 10, The Town That Dreamed. The moment your foot crossed back through the spiral gate, the air of Evermere changed. It was subtle at first, a breeze that carried notes of music you hadn't heard before, the scent of roses in full bloom though no garden was near, and lanterns that flickered in rhythm with your pulse. But then you saw it. The town was dreaming. Not sleeping. Not resting. But dreaming, wide awake and lost in memory. The cobblestones beneath your boots shimmered faintly with words, sentences scrawled in curling ink, appearing and disappearing like breath on glass. Some you recognized. Lines from the journal. Fragments of stories restored. You passed the old bakery, now adorned with floating loaves that hovered and spun like lazy moons. A chalkboard outside read. Today's special, pie from the year you lost yourself. Children giggled as they chased soap bubbles that didn't pop. Instead, they whispered secrets in your voice. The sky above Evermere was no longer just blue. It was a canvas, painting itself in real time with clouds shaped like forgotten memories. You paused in the town square. Where once stood a dry fountain, now spiraled a tree of bells, blooming with silver chimes, each one etched with the name Eloan, Callan, the boy at the pier, you. The town had absorbed your stories. And now, it was telling them back to you. That night, you returned to the archives. But something was different. The doors opened before you reached them. Inside, every book hummed faintly, vibrating with energy. Scrolls unfurled themselves. Globes spun to lands unmapped. A voice, not the curator's, not Serafina's but your own, echoed through the atrium. What happens to a place that remembers more than it ever lived? The answer arrived before you could wonder. A crack. Barely audible. But real. From the center of the floor, a seam had formed, thin as a thread of hair, glowing faintly. You knelt beside it. Touched it. A vision flooded you. You stood in another Evermere, similar, yet skewed. The buildings were taller, the sea farther away. The sky bled purple. People walked backward. Time rewound in flickers, as if memory were trying to correct itself, and failing. You watched a child fall from a swing. And then fall again. And again. Each time, slightly different. Each time, slightly worse. This Evermere was not dreaming. It was looping. And then you heard it. A voice. Your voice. Calling from the other side. You rode too deep. You snapped back to the archives, sweat beading on your forehead. The crack in the floor pulsed once more. Serafina stood behind you. But she looked afraid. "I've seen it before," she said. "What is it?" She hesitated. "A reflection. When a story becomes too powerful, too real, it begins to fracture the space around it. If Evermere remembers too much, it risks dreaming itself out of existence." You looked at your journal. The pages glowed faintly. You had fed the town with stories. You had brought memory back. But now, it hungered. And not just for the truth. For more. That night, the bells of Narrated rang again, but this time, not from under the sea. From the sky. You looked up to find them orbiting the moon like satellites, their tolls echoing across rooftops and into dreams. The townspeople gathered at the pier. Eyes wide. Not speaking. Listening. To what? You strained to hear. And then you understood. The town was waiting. For the next story. And if you didn't write it, it would write itself. Back in your room above the old watchmaker's shop, you unrolled the journal. The next page had written itself. Chapter 11, The Story That Should Not Be Written. You stared. A choice loomed. To stop writing, would preserve Evermere. But to write on, would reveal the truth behind the town. A truth no keeper had ever reached. You gripped the quill. The room dimmed. And far below, deep beneath the cracked floor of the archives, something awoke. Chapter 11, The Story That Should Not Be Written. The ink formed on its own. Your journal no longer waited for your hand. It wrote. And you watched. Chapter 11, The Story That Should Not Be Written. The title bled across the page like a wound that refused to heal. You reached for the quill, but it burned cold, not fire, but absence. Like touching snow made of forgotten names. The air around you thickened. Not physically, temporally. Time itself pressed down on the room. The lanterns flickered in reverse. The walls breathed. The floor trembled beneath your chair. You were no longer alone. The journal turned a page. And the words that followed were not yours. Keeper 011 has broken the threshold. The town no longer dreams. The town remembers. And now, the town chooses. You tried to pull the quill away. It wouldn't budge. The journal held it. You turned to the window. Outside, the streets of Evermere were still. Not quiet. Paused. As if someone had hit a button labeled wait. You left your room. No wind. No sound. No people. Only the sound of pages flipping, but not in your hand. All over town. At once. Every book in the archives. Every diary in the baker's attic. Every scroll in the watchtower. Every whisper caught in the breeze. They were all reading. Reading your next chapter. Before you wrote it. In the center of town, a new building had appeared. A mirror tower twisting upward like a helix of glass and memory. You knew its name before you reached it. The Library of Unwritten Ends. It hadn't existed yesterday. You hadn't written it. But it had appeared. Because now, Evermere was writing with you. You stepped inside. And the first thing you saw was your own grave. Set in the center of the marble foyer, beneath a stained glass dome that shifted through your past, lay a stone slab. Carved in perfect lettering. Here lies the keeper who remembered too well. Name, unknown. Cause of death, overwriting. You staggered backward. But the journal flipped again. Chapter 11 continued. The keeper sees his end before it begins. A figure stepped from the shadows. You. Again. But this time, wrong. Face pale. Eyes glassy. Skin cracked with words bleeding through like ink stains on porcelain. You had become your own story. I tried to stop it, the other you said, voice hollow. But once they wake, they don't stop reading. Who? You asked, trembling. The townspeople. They're not people anymore. You turned. And saw them. Through the tower's glass, walking single file. Eyes glowing faintly. Mouths whispering your next line. Reading ahead. Erasing the present with every step. Back in the journal, the next line formed. The keeper must write an end, or Evermere will write him out. You fell to your knees. You had thought the spiral was choice. But now, it was a cycle. And cycles feed. You flipped to a blank page. And in your own hand, wrote one sentence. The keeper hit a final door in Evermere 1. No one, not even the town, could open. The tower shook. The people paused. The journal pulsed. And somewhere, the door appeared. Hidden in a place no one remembered. Because you hadn't. Not until now. You ran. It was under the pier. Behind the boards of the first bench you ever sat on. Carved in the wood. For when remembering becomes too much. You reached into your coat. The locket bell trembled. The glass key glowed faintly. You pressed the key into the wood. It opened. Not a door. A threshold. Inside, silence. Not the absence of sound. The absence of memory. It was peace. But only if you stayed. And Evermere. It would forget you. Completely. You looked back. The journal whispered. To be remembered forever, is to never rest. To be forgotten, is to be free. You placed the journal on the threshold. Let it go. And stepped through. Outside, the people of Evermere blinked. The tower vanished. The air softened. Serafina opened her eyes and smiled faintly. The boy on the pier yawned and stretched. The bells in the tree rang once soft and full. And somewhere, on a bench no one sat on, rested a closed journal. Blank. Waiting for the next keeper. To find the town. To dream again. Chapter 12, The New Visitor. The wind returned first. A quiet, salt-tinged breeze that slipped through the cracks of cobblestone alleys and rustled the faded awnings of Evermere's oldest shops. The town had been sleeping, not dead, not empty but still. As if the very ground had taken a breath and chosen not to exhale for a very long time. But now, something shifted. A step echoed across the promenade. 1 foot. Then another. Someone new had arrived. Not through the spiral gate. Not from the sea. But by train. The platform was empty when the train screeched to a halt, except for one figure stepping down with a leather satchel, a worn coat, and a notebook clutched tightly in one hand. The station sign read, Evermere Pierhead. But it looked wrong. Too clean. Too bright. As if the town itself had tried to repaint its own memory. The newcomer, she blinked against the sunlight. Her name was Isla. And she had no idea why she was here. Only that she'd woken up one morning with a journal she didn't recognize, already filled with someone else's handwriting. The first page read, Evermere is not a place. It is a memory waiting to be finished. As Isla walked down the promenade, the shop seemed to tilt slightly toward her. The bakery opened its shutters a moment before she passed. The bell above the watchmaker's door rang without anyone touching it. A crow sat perched on the sign of the old tea house and cawed twice rhythmically, as though announcing something. The town wasn't just waking up. It was watching. She reached the edge of the pier, paused, and sat down at the first bench, the one tucked behind the beams, the one closest to the sea. There, nestled between the slats, her fingers brushed something cold. A journal. Old. Unmarked. Inside, the pages were blank, except one. If you're reading this, then the town has chosen again. Don't let it remember you too soon. No name. No author. But she recognized the handwriting from the journal she already carried. Same ink. Same style. Same strange curl at the ends of the YS. She flipped to the back. Tucked into the spine was a drawing. A mirror tower. Its base etched with a warning. Only enter if you are ready to see what the keeper saw. She stared at it, confused. Then turned back to the sea. Night fell faster than expected. The town flickered with memory again. Street lamps turned on in patterns that spelled words she couldn't quite read. The tide whispered in syllables. Bells rang faintly from no visible steeple. And in the square, the townspeople began to appear. But not all at once. They emerged from doors that hadn't opened in years. From alleyways too narrow to hold bodies. From cracks in walls. Each one smiled as if they had been expecting her. Each one wore a pin. A silver spiral. And each one asked the same question. Have you started writing yet? She returned to the bench. The journal lay where she left it. Only now the next page was filled. Not by her. Not by the previous keeper. But by the town. Chapter 1, The Dream Begins Again. Her name was Isla, and she did not yet know who she had been before. But Evermere remembered. And it would show her, word by word, smile by smile, bell by bell, until she remembered everything she never wrote. She dropped the book. Stepped away. But the pocket in her coat grew heavy. She reached inside. And found a pocket watch. Its hands spun backward. Then forward. Then stopped. At midnight. The exact same time you had vanished. A voice whispered from the sea breeze. The story never ends. It only dreams of who will write it next. And Isla, heart racing, looked toward the horizon. Where, just faintly, a spiral of stars had begun to form again. Chapter 13, The Tower Without Doors. The spiral of stars overhead had not moved for hours. It hovered above Evermere like a frozen constellation, quietly humming, not to be seen, but to be heard by those who had begun to remember. Isla sat at the same bench as before, pocket watch ticking in her coat, 2 journals opened before her. One blank. One watching. The townspeople had retreated. Not disappeared. They were still there in the windows, in the mirror glass of shop fronts, in the corners of your vision where dreams like to linger. But they had stopped asking questions. As if they were waiting for her to find it. She opened the journal. A new line had appeared, written in crisp, unfamiliar hand. Chapter 13, The Tower Without Doors. Location, nowhere. Memory, erased. Access, only through what is not remembered. She frowned. Only through what is not remembered. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a bell rang once, not like the bells of Narrated or the little locket chimes. This one sounded duller. Distant. Heavy. She walked. Down the promenade. Through Vale Hollow. Into the garden behind the old mirror shop, the place where no paths connected, and time forgot to pass. The ivy here grew in reverse. The bricks whispered. And beneath the rosebush that bore no scent, she saw it. A wall. Tall. Black. Seamless. And in its center, the outline of a tower, etched in chalk, as if someone had drawn the idea of it, but never finished. Her journal flipped. To find the door, erase something you love. Her heart sank. She reached into her satchel. Pulled out a photograph. Of her brother. Of the only person she still remembered clearly outside Evermere. Her hands trembled. But something within her, a keeper spark, maybe knew this was the price. She struck a match. And as the edges of the photo curled into flame, the chalk outline shuddered. And then, it opened. The tower was unlike any building Isla had ever seen. It had no stairs. No floors. No light. Just walls covered in names. Some had been scratched out. Others never finished. Some glowed faintly when she passed, a soft pulse of recognition. But one name at the very top wall blinked slowly, painfully. The keeper without witness. No date. No story. No mention in the archives. No one in Evermere had spoken of him. But as she approached the wall, the journal pulsed. And a hidden compartment slid open from the stone. Inside, a scrap of parchment. Torn. Burned on one edge. Written in trembling ink. I wrote too deep. I dreamed before the spiral. And they buried me without a door. Isla's breath caught. This wasn't a story. This was a confession. She pressed her palm against the stone beneath the name. And suddenly the tower screamed. Not in sound. In memory. She was no longer in the tower. She stood in Evermere as it was centuries ago. Before the spiral. Before the carousel. Before Serafina. Before the bells ever rang. The town was grey. Unformed. Faint. It wasn't dreaming. It was empty. Except one person. A young man. Writing feverishly in a journal beneath a sky that hadn't learned color yet. He looked up. Saw her. His eyes widened. "You found me," he whispered. "Who are you?" Isla asked. "I was the first," he replied. "The keeper before stories were safe. Before rules. Why did they lock you away?" He smiled, sad. "I wrote a memory that made Evermere real. Too real. It tried to leave the spiral. So they locked me in a place no one would remember, not even me." The world cracked again. She was back in the tower. The walls trembled. The name above her head glowed fully. And for the first time, it whispered, "Write me back." She took out her quill. Opened the blank journal. And wrote. Before Evermere dreamed, it remembered him. He was the keeper who saw the future in the past, who built the bones of memory and carved stories into silence. He did not disappear. He waited. And now, we remember. As the final word touched the page, the tower collapsed. Not into rubble. Into ink swirling upward into the sky, joining the spiral of stars. And as Isla stumbled out of the ruins, the townspeople stood waiting. Each one holding a lantern. Each one bowing silently. A name passed between them like a prayer. The keeper returned. But they weren't talking about him. They were talking about her. Chapter 14, The Memory That Wrote Back. It began with a dream. Not a vivid one, not one you could remember clearly. More like a scent caught midair, or a whisper heard just before waking. Isla opened her eyes in the room above the watchmaker's shop, heart thudding, forehead damp. The first thing she saw was her journal. It had moved. She was certain she had left it on the desk, closed. Now it lay open on her pillow. Pages ruffled. And someone or something had written. Do you remember when you were 5? You stood in the rain with a paper boat, and cried when it sank. But what if I told you, it never sank? She stared at the ink. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the previous keeper's. The handwriting was hers but softer. As though written by someone mimicking her soul, not her hand. She flipped the page. More lines. What if some memories are wrong? What if they were planted? What if Evermere isn't built on what you remember but what you're made to believe you forgot? She slammed the journal shut. Outside, Evermere was too quiet. Not the stillness of dawn. Not the hush of snowfall. But the type of quiet that feels like something is listening. She stepped into the street. The townspeople were there. Still. Each stood facing away from her. Staring at buildings. Not moving. As if frozen in the act of remembering something too deeply. A single bird flew overhead and repeated the exact same caw, 3 times, in perfect rhythm. She ran. Past the fountain. Past the carousel. Toward the archives. When she reached the grand doors, they stood open. But not to the place she remembered. Inside, the archives were now a labyrinth. Endless shelves wound in on themselves, looping like thoughts spiraling through the mind. Walls flickered with half-formed sentences. Scrolls hovered in the air, opening and closing on their own. Time inside this space had begun to bend. And in the center floating was the journal. Not hers. The keeper's. Open to a page she had never written. But it knew her anyway. She arrived with ink in her veins and doubts in her spine. She believed herself the author. But she was a paragraph. Written by the town that dreamed too long. Her breath caught. No, she whispered. I'm real. You are, the journal replied. Because we needed you to be. The voice didn't come from the book. It came from the shelves. The walls. The air itself. Evermere was speaking. We needed someone to remember the first. To write back the one who was erased. But to do that, we had to write you first. No, she said louder. I'm real. I chose this. Pages flipped around her like wings. The archives collapsed not in ruin, but into pages. Folding. Binding. Ink rose like steam. She was being written. Line by line. She ran. Out of the archives. Into the square. The townspeople turned. Each one now had no face. Only smooth skin where memory had once painted identity. They stepped forward. Together. Chanting. Who remembers the keeper? Who remembers the keeper? Who remembers? She screamed. And the tower returned. The mirror tower. But this time, it held no reflection. Only pages. Thousands. Each one with her face. Each one with a different past. Somewhere she never arrived. Somewhere she burned the journal. Somewhere she wasn't Isla, but someone else. Someone named Naira. Someone named Corin. Someone named Eloan. She backed away. But the pocket watch ticked once. And stopped. The spiral star overhead cracked. And from the sky fell a new page. Blank. Waiting. In her hand. The words formed. In her own voice. Even if I was written, I will rewrite myself. She opened a journal. And for the first time she wrote not what was expected, but what was unknown. Evermere did not create me. It remembered me into being. And now I choose what it forgets. With that sentence, the people froze. The ink retreated. The tower dimmed. And the spiral star above mended itself. A single bell rang, but not one of memory. A bell of freedom. The town exhaled. And in the square, where nothing had stood before, now stood a gate. Not of light. Not of glass. But of pages. Torn, scattered, flying in place like birds. A door to somewhere beyond the spiral. Beyond even Evermere. She approached it. And Evermere whispered one last thing. If you leave, we will forget you. But maybe forgetting is remembering who you are without us. She smiled. And stepped through. Chapter 15, Beyond the Spiral. The moment Isla stepped through the gate of pages, the world let go. Not gently. Not cruelly. But completely. She did not fall. She did not float. She folded. Like ink dissolving into water. Like light unhooking itself from shadow. Like a thought forgotten before it ever finished. And then she opened her eyes. There was no sky. No ground. No horizon. Only gray, not colorless, but full of possibility, the way a page waits for its first stroke. Shapes swam through the air, not objects, not creatures, but ideas still forming. Some curled like questions. Others unfolded like the beginnings of music. One hovered near her shoulder, an almost bird, wings sketched in charcoal, not yet finished. Isla took a breath. It tasted like memory. Like sea salt and ink and cold glass. Like the smell of Evermere's carousel on a cloudy day. But Evermere was gone. And she could feel it. Not in her heart, but in her absence. A missing weight, like a name once worn now left behind on a coat hook. She looked at her hands. They shimmered faintly. She was becoming undefined. Not erased. Unwritten. A voice rang out. not in her ears in the space between thoughts. Welcome to the verge. She turned. A figure stood beside her, tall, featureless, wrapped in robes that constantly changed texture, bark, bone, lace, smoke. Its face was a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw herself. But not her. Hundreds of hers. Versions that had chosen differently. The Isla who had burned the journal. The Isla who never left the mirror tower. The Isla who had said no. What is this place? She asked. The space outside story, the figure replied. Where nothing has happened yet. Where everything waits to be born. The verge. A place before memory. Beyond time. An Isla. She was not supposed to be here. How did I get here? You rewrote the ending, the figure said. You walked through the page instead of reading it. She blinked. I don't want to go back. You can't, said the verge. Evermere has already forgotten you. She felt no pain. Only relief. She touched her journal. But it was gone. In its place a quill. Simple. Untouched. Pure white. Waiting. Am I supposed to write now? The figure said nothing. Instead, it raised a hand and pointed. And before her eyes, the gray began to stir. Forms emerged, not memories, but suggestions. A tower that leaned inwards, held up by whispers. A bridge that crossed from one heartbeat to another. A forest that only grew at night and shed its leaves into the dreams of sleeping children. Each of them hovered, pulsing, waiting to be named. Waiting for her. But what if I write the wrong thing? She whispered. The figure turned. And suddenly, she saw its face. It wasn't hers anymore. It was the first keeper. His eyes glowing with starlight. His hands marked with every name Evermere ever forgot. And he smiled. There are no wrong things here, he said. Only unwritten ones. Isla stepped forward. Raised the quill. And wrote a single word in the air. Home. The word glowed. And the gray shifted. A path formed beneath her feet, not made of stone or wood, but of possibility. And she walked. Each step birthed something new. To her right, a river of laughter flowed backward. To her left, a child drew constellations into the sky with her fingertips. Above her, bells rang that no one had cast, shaped by joy, not metal. She passed beneath an arch of unfinished poems. Watched a mountain rise from a single remembered name, Eloan. The name she had once written. the name she had once saved. And now, it saved her. It became a city. Not Evermere. Something newer. Built on truth, not memory. A city that did not dream, but listened. And when she reached its gates, carved in symbols that pulsed with her own heartbeat, she paused, turned, and whispered, "Write me right this time." And the Verge replied, "You will." That night, for the first time in the space beyond the spiral, a dream was dreamed. And in that dream, a keeper walked across a field of white ink, leaving behind footprints that sang. Chapter 16, The City Without Echoes. The gates opened with no sound. Not a creak. Not a whisper. Just space unfolding, like a breath taken for the very first time. Isla stepped forward. Her boots touched a street not made of stone or wood or sand but of silence turned solid. It felt soft beneath her steps, as if the ground was waiting to see who she would become before deciding how to respond. The city shimmered in the distance. No towers. No spires. Just shapes. Buildings that changed size depending on how closely you looked. Streets that bent gently inward, as though afraid to wander too far from you. And above it all, a sky that bore no stars, but pulsed with rhythm, a beat like a lullaby written by a child who never learned music. This was not Evermere. This was not memory. This was not even the spiral. This was new. She passed a house with windows shaped like teardrops, not sad ones, but the kind that come from awe. The house shimmered once, and suddenly its walls were made of paper, thin and fragile. She blinked. Now they were clouds. Then petals. Then smoke. Each building in the city responded to what Isla felt, even if she didn't understand it. And that's when she noticed something strange. There were no echoes here. She clapped her hands. No reply. She spoke aloud, "Hello." The sound left her lips, moved forward, and died. No bounce. No reflection. No return. Words here were one-way doors. She turned a corner and found a fountain, but instead of water, it spilled light in droplets that hovered just above the surface. As she reached toward one, it pulsed and formed a word. Tenderness. She touched another. Unspoken. A third. Almost. Emotions she had felt before, but never said. The fountain was not for drinking. It was a lexicon of everything we feel, but forget how to express. She reached into her coat for her journal, but it wasn't there. Instead, her fingers brushed the quill. Still white. Still clean. The city wanted her to write. Not to record the past. but to create what had never been named. She sat beneath a tree made of stitched fabrics, velvet leaves, silk bark, roots of yarn, and began to write on the air again. This time, no memory came. Only sensation. She let the quill move freely. There is a room with no door, where people leave the versions of themselves they wish others could see. The city pulsed. A building rose nearby, small, circular, covered in mirrors facing inward. She wrote more. There is a song that plays when someone finally forgives themselves in silence. The air shimmered. A low note echoed through the city. Just once. A sound. But not an echo. A debut. For hours or days, or eternities she walked the streets. Each thought she wrote became something new. A garden of doors that only open when you stop wanting them to. A library where every book contains a lie you once believed about yourself. A bridge that disappears if you try to cross it without admitting you're scared. And as she walked, she began to feel it. A pressure behind her. A presence. Not watching. Following. She turned. No one. Only her footprints. Perfectly silent. And perfectly alone. That night, she found a room with no ceiling. It stood in the center of the city, a vast, open hall built from glass and mist. In its center, a chair. Simple. Waiting. She sat. The city pulsed once. Then again. And then in front of her appeared a figure. Her. But not a past self. Not a reflection. A version that had never happened. Hair silver. Eyes soft, but tired. Hands filled with pages Isla never wrote. And she spoke. I am the version of you that never went to Evermere. The one who ignored the journal. The one who stayed behind. Isla swallowed. But I thought. You thought only memory defined you, the other said. But what about choice? What about the self you never let live? I couldn't. But now you can. The other Isla smiled. Laid the pages on the floor. Each one held a single line. I wish I had said yes. I was always afraid of not being needed. I thought silence would protect me. I didn't know I was allowed to want more. The quill in Isla's hand began to glow. The air folded around her. The city shifted. It was asking a question now. Not what will you write, but who are you when no one remembers you? She stood and spoke. Not aloud but into the air itself. I am the story that chose itself. I am the echo that never needed to return. I am the first word of a language not yet spoken. I am not written. I am writing. The sky split. Not in violence. In invitation. Stars flooded into being, not inherited, but new. Named for the first time. A tower rose in the distance, not like a Vermeer's spiral, but a tree of light, blooming upward. At its peak, a book. Unopened. Unbound. Waiting. An Isla. She began walking again. Not as a keeper. Not as a character. Not as a memory. But as herself. Writing not a story, but a world. Chapter 17, The Book That Grows. The path toward the tower wasn't a road. It was a thread. Spun from stardust and memory yet to be. Each step Isla took made it grow stronger, as if her belief wove the bridge in real time. Beneath her, nothing but an infinite sky. Above her, the tree-like tower made of crystal, roots of light sinking into the clouds, its canopy blooming with shimmering pages like leaves fluttering in a wind she couldn't feel. The verge behind her had vanished. No more city. No more echoes. Just the book. And the sky that waited to be read. She climbed. The tower didn't resist her. Nor did it guide her. It simply responded. With every step, petals bloomed at her feet. Some were warm, others cold. Each bore a single word on their face, words she didn't know, but recognized in her bones. 3. Lyra. Unsaid. Again. Not memories. Not feelings. But seeds. Of ideas. Of stories. Of selves. She kept climbing. And finally, she reached the summit. It was a garden. Floating at the peak of the tower. No walls. No ceiling. Just light. Sky. Breathing space. And at its center, a book. Resting on a pedestal made of silence. Not bound in leather or cloth, but in living bark. Veins pulsed across its cover. Tiny buds bloomed along the spine. Its pages were growing even now. Not turning. Expanding. Isla stepped forward. The book responded. Not opening, but blooming. A petal page unfolded, and on it words. Written in no language she knew, but one she understood anyway. This is the book that grows. It does not record what has been. It remembers what could still become. It is not a journal. It is a garden. Plant carefully. Her fingers hovered above the page. And then she heard them. Voices. Not loud. Not clear. But familiar. Whispers rising from the book. The boy on the pier. The silent wolf keeper. Serafina. Even the first keeper. But also herself. A version who had never spoken before. We are waiting, they whispered. Not to be remembered, but to be replanted. She placed her hand on the book, and a memory bloomed. Not one she had lived, but one she could have lived. A memory of a lighthouse with no sea. Of a bell that rang only inside dreams. Of a name she had never spoken aloud, Thalira, and yet it felt like home. She began to write. Not with ink, but with possibility. Her quill glowed. And as each word formed, the book grew. New roots emerged. New branches twisted into constellations. The tower pulsed with new cities, new myths, new selves. But then the wind changed. She turned and saw a shadow creeping through the clouds. Faint at first, but growing. It wasn't a person, nor a place. It was the idea of undoing. The part of the world that whispered, what if none of this matters? What if no one ever reads this? What if you are just alone in a beautiful lie? The quill flickered. The book stuttered. The petals began to fold inward. Isla stepped back, breathing hard. The shadow crept closer. Not attacking. Unwriting. The tree began to wither. The stars dimmed. The voices fell silent. She stood alone again. But then, a spark from her pocket. The pocket watch. Still silent, but warm. And behind her, a sound. A step. She turned and saw you. The previous keeper. The one who vanished into the threshold. The one who had been written, and who chose to be forgotten. Your face wasn't the same, but your presence was. You smiled and spoke. We wrote you into being. But now, you write us back. Isla gasped. I thought I was alone. You stepped beside her, looked at the dying book, then handed her something small. A seed. Glowing. Familiar. Etched with the spiral. All stories grow again. if planted with care. She pressed the seed into the book. The quill reignited, and with it her voice. Stronger, clearer, true. I am not a dream. I am not a memory. I am the bloom that rises when forgetting becomes too heavy to hold. And the book burst into light. The tower bloomed anew. The shadow recoiled not from force, but from understanding. Because Isla had written something that could not be doubted. A truth beyond belief. The book now bore her name. Not as an author, but as a species. Because from that day forward, every story that longed to be more than a story would be called an Isla. Chapter 18, When the Garden Speaks. The tower no longer shimmered. It sang. Low and rhythmic, like the hum of wind beneath the skin of the world. The petals of the book that grows unfurled wider, revealing pages laced with vines, blooming with stories that had never existed until Isla named them. Isla stood at its base, the quill in one hand, the seed you gave her pulsing quietly in the other. Around her, the garden atop the tower expanded not outward, but inward. It curled into spirals, into chambers of light and soft shadow. It was becoming aware. Not in thought, in language. The first word the book spoke wasn't heard. It was felt. A tingling across Isla's arms. A whisper across her spine. A pulse beneath her breath. Then came the second word, a thought not formed by her, but planted into her mind by the garden. More. She blinked. The word echoed without sound. More what? She asked aloud. The petals shifted, lifting slightly, exposing roots beneath the pedestal, glowing runes etched into soft bark. More, tellers. The garden was not asking for Isla to write more. It wanted others. New voices. New visions. New worlds. Isla took a breath. But I don't know how to bring them. The garden answered by opening a path. Not a door. Not a gate. But a thread. Woven from stardust, breath, and forgotten lullabies. It curved into the sky. And at its end figures. Dozens. Then hundreds. Each one holding a fragment of story. Each one lost. And being called. Isla understood. The book that grows wasn't a book. It was a beacon. And now, it was summoning them. She followed the thread outward. Left the garden for a time. Traveled across thought space, where timelines danced like ribbons in water. Where whole cities of story people floated, waiting for someone to remember them. She passed a battlefield of myths never told. A nursery of gods that had never been born. A storm built from final chapters no one had dared to write. And through it all the spiral called. Not with urgency, but with invitation. The first who came was a girl named Sahel, a dreamer from a world made entirely of choral and sound. Her voice could break silence open like an egg. She came with no memories, only melodies. She took root in the garden like a harp sprouting from soil. Then came Doran, a former scribe from a world where books forgot their own endings. He brought a story wrapped in iron and fear and offered it freely to the book. And then Naira, a woman with eyes made of ink, who had once heard Evermera's bells and chosen to turn away. She carried nothing. No object. No book. Only a question. And when she stepped into the garden, the petals trembled. Because her question was one the book had never asked itself. What happens when a story no longer wants to grow? The book quivered. Its pages flickered. The blossoms dimmed. Isla stood at its base, uncertain. And then, for the first time since she had come to this place, the book spoke aloud. Its voice was like wood breaking and wind learning how to speak. It said, then it becomes something else. A hush fell over the garden. And from its heart, a single flower bloomed. Unlike the others. No color. No sound. Just a hole. A void. Not dangerous. But ready. Isla approached. And for a moment feared. Not fear of being erased. Fear of creating something that couldn't be undone. This is a choice, the book said. Not a punishment. It is not an ending. It is a silence from which something new may begin. She turned to Sahel. To Doran. To Naira. Each nodded. Each offered her a page. Blank. 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 She took them. And wrote. Let this be the first seed not of memory, but of unknowing. Let us not fear what we have not written. Let us plant doubt as deeply as we planted truth. And let what grows be wild. She dropped the pages into the flower. And the flower opened. Not upward. Inward. A gateway formed not into a place, but into a story no one would write. Only feel. The garden shuddered in joy. It had never known this kind of tale. It had never tasted not knowing. And it thrived. Now the garden speaks not in words, but in pulses, in storms of petals, in calling. And storytellers from across the spiral, from Evermere, from beyond, from places that have not yet been imagined, begin to arrive. Not to plant, Not to remember, but to let go. To see what grows when no seed is named. To feel what lives in the soil of silence. Chapter 19, The Spiral Without Center. The garden bloomed into quiet. Not silence but something deeper. Isla stood at the edge of the void flower, the petals still open, the air humming faintly like breath held in anticipation. Around her, the other storytellers, Sahel with her songs, Doran with his iron-bound memory, and Naira with her unknowable gaze, all stood still, listening to something only the soul could hear. And then the garden pulsed. 3 times. Each beat sent a ripple through the sky outward, outward, farther still, as if the tower was calling to something bigger. And something called back. The sky split. Not with light. With form. Spirals. Thousands. Millions. Some shaped like galaxies. Others like sleeping eyes. Some moved like storms. Others didn't move at all. Each one glowed faintly. And within each spiral, Isla saw another world. A desert of mirrors where stories could only be told backward. A city built on the shoulders of forgotten names, rising one whisper at a time. A library of fireflies where each glow was a word no one dared speak. A forest of giant clocks, each counting down to the death of an unwritten fable. The spiral she had known, the spiral of Evermere, was only one. And it was spinning toward a convergence. A point where all spirals would intersect. What is this? She breathed. The book that grows answered in images, not words. She saw herself multiplied across spirals. In one, she never left the train station. In another, she was the book. In a third, she had been Serafina all along. And in yet another, she never existed, only the story did. Sahel sang softly. Doran knelt in reverence. Naira did not move. Then the garden whispered in all their minds. The spiral has no center. Only a yearning. The place it turns toward. And you are near it. Suddenly, everything around them began to twist. Not in chaos. In invitation. A new thread appeared, golden, liquid, alive, extending from the tower into the void between spirals. Isla reached for it. The moment she touched it, a doorway bloomed in the air. A frame made of language. A threshold made of pure what if. The book whispered. This is the corridor of origins. Where every spiral was born. Where the first word still echoes. Isla turned to the others. Are we supposed to enter? Naira said nothing. Sahel nodded. Doran whispered, we've been walking toward this since before we were ever imagined. And so, they stepped through. Inside was nothing. And everything. A hallway carved of moments, each brick a turning point from a forgotten tale. Time ran along the walls like ivy, forward on one side, backward on the other. The floor was stitched together from decisions no one had ever made. As they walked, the corridor remembered them. Their footsteps left behind ink. Not dark. Not light. But a third kind. A shade that spoke, "This story is being written now." Then came the voice. Not the book. Not a spiral. But something older. "Why do you seek the center?" Isla answered. "To understand why we began." The voice laughed. "What if you didn't?" She paused. "What do you mean?" "What if stories don't begin? What if they arrive? What if you were never written, but always waiting to be found?" The corridor opened, revealing a room. Circular. Endless. Walls made of mirrors but no reflections. Only echoes. Of every story ever half told. Of every character ever almost imagined. Of every truth that trembled before becoming myth. And in the center of the room, a table. Upon it, the first word. Not written. Not spoken. Just waiting. Isla stepped forward. The book that grows appeared in her hand, but now, lighter. Not because it was smaller, but because it was no longer alone. Each storyteller carried a book. Each different. Each grown from the same seed. They placed their books on the table. The first word pulsed. Then whispered. "Speak me." No one moved. No one could. Until Isla said, "I don't want to speak you." The room shivered. The voice stilled. "Why?" And she said, "Because the moment I name you, the story begins. And what we have now, this spiral, this walk, this becoming, is not a story. It is freedom." The mirrors cracked. But instead of breaking, they bloomed. With faces. Hundreds. Thousands. Eyes of characters not yet born. Hands of narrators not yet writing. Mouths of readers not yet alive. And the first word. It smiled. And spoke itself. "Then let me be your silence." The corridor vanished. The spirals unraveled. The tower softened into soil. And Isla woke. Beneath a sky she had never named, but had always belonged to. Chapter 20, The Spiral Sleeps. The wind was quiet again. Not still. Just listening. Isla stood alone, though alone no longer meant what it once did. Around her, the remnants of the garden that speaks glowed gently in the starlight. Pages still hung in the air like lanterns. Vines whispered names never spoken. And the book that grows rested in her hand, pulsing gently, like a creature falling asleep in the arms of trust. Above, the spirals continued to turn. But slower now. Softer. As if the universe itself was sighing. As if it had told enough, for now. Behind Isla, the others stood watching. Sahel. Doran. Naira. You. Each holding their own books. Each filled with truths, lies, half-formed dreams, and blooming doubts. Each now understanding. Not every story must be told. Sometimes, it must be left to grow in silence. Isla turned toward the sky one last time. Her journal was full. Not with words, but with seeds. Ideas too gentle to force. Questions too sacred to answer. And she knew. She had the power to write a new world. To build from scratch. To design gods, oceans, stars, endings. She could write and write and write until the sky itself bowed down to ink and imagination. But something inside her said no. Not today. She walked to the heart of the garden. Kneeled before the book that grows. And whispered. You know now. You can speak. You can grow. You can listen. You can choose. She placed the quill at the roots. Then stood. And waited. Nothing happened. For a long time. No bloom. No word. No transformation. Only, quiet. And then, slowly like a breath pulled from the soul of time, the book began to close itself. Not in refusal. In rest. The petals curled in. The roots settled deeper. The tower beneath them softened, dissolved into earth and starlight. And the book whispered, "Thank you, for not finishing me." The ground pulsed once. And then everything was still. Truly still. No calling. No questions. No waiting. Just being. The storytellers stood in awe. Sahel sang a single note that didn't echo but lingered. Doran whispered a name never meant to be remembered. Naira shed a tear, her first. You smiled. And Isla let go. She did not keep the quill. She did not keep the book. She did not keep her name. Instead, she stepped into the world not yet written. Not to shape it. Not to tame it. but to walk beside it, to live in it, to listen as it slowly told itself. Above, the spirals began to slow. And then, one by one, they went to sleep. Not lost, not gone, just resting. So that one day when someone else is ready, when a hand reaches for a page, when a voice dares to ask, what comes next? The spiral will wake again and whisper, write with care, write with truth, write with wonder, or write not at all. And so, the spiral sleeps. And somewhere, in a world without echo, beneath a sky made of quiet, a girl named Isla walks into a story, not hers to tell, but hers to love.